I in particular have studied the Baptists and Pentecostals because they came in for especially sharp repression because they were, of course, not Orthodox. They're Slav, but yet they're choosing not to be Orthodox. And they had a whole variety of means by which they were able to carry on. For example, you're right that they very often did go into the woods or go someplace, do certain rituals, in particular, ordaining clergy. And of course, they were in a situation whereby believers had to self-ordain certain clergy, and then once you had some clergy, they could then ordain other clergy. So use some kind of official mechanism whereby to bestow authority on some people over others. And they did that, you're right, in sort of invisible, if you will, types of places. And one way in which that they would do that, for example, is the word would spread by mouth. I mean, nothing, of course, in any way, shape, or form written anywhere, but people would know that they should take a particular train at a certain time. They wouldn't even know where they were getting off, because they wouldn't, let's say if somebody was stopped, they would never want that person to be in a situation whereby they might say something that would jeopardize other people. So they would simply be told which train, which time or which platform or some signal as so that they would know which train to get onto. And then people then recognizing each other on the train would in some way signal the moment when they were supposed to get off. And that would be, so it's at once highly organized, but in this very, very elastic, amorphous way, so that at any given moment, it can all be dissolved. I mean, at any given moment, these, let's say, ritual of ordaining clergy could be dissolved. They told me very often that once they would get to this, they would do this complex way of organizing, getting people to a particular place in the woods, and they would get there, and who would they find but, KGB officers ready and willing to arrest them. And even up towards the end of into the 80s, for example, then they would still be fined for having congregated. That was considered an unlawful assembly, and they were in violation of the law. So they would, by the end of the 1980s, they were simply being fined and being suspended from work and then losing their salary, which was still a hardship to incur that kind of a penalty. But that's one way in which they were able to continue to have clergy. For these Baptists also, for example, the entire practice of teaching their children, they would organize something along the lines of a Sunday school, but they would meet then in people's apartment. But so as to hide the fact, why are, let's say, 10 kids in a particular apartment, the story would be that it was a birthday party. So in other words, if any of the neighbors got curious or anybody else were to inquire, again, at any given moment, a Sunday school could become a birthday party. And so they always had to have these sort of backdoor options whereby any kind of overt religious practice could a second later be something entirely different. One thing that really amazed me was among Orthodox and Greek Catholics, for example, was the insistence of having a member of the clergy present at a burial. When someone would die, there was a real insistence that there had to be a member of the clergy to seal the grave, which meant that once the churches were monitored for any kind of religious activity, simply those kinds of rituals then began to take place right in the cemetery. And then it was only a matter of time then before the cemeteries came under the same kind of scrutiny and surveillance that the churches themselves had come under. So sometimes in the case of Orthodoxy, it would be the place of the ritual would change too, until that would be monitored and closed down as well. But very often I was really stunned when I did archival research about the degree to which, this would be in Ukraine in particular, that when they would come to funerals and, seek to get the clergy out of those funeral ceremonies, the number of Communist Party officials who were present. And this was in particular something that troubled Khrushchev.